Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We've got a stack of today's most complex sources, and our mission, as always, is to cut right to the core insights. We're starting today in the editorial section, and we're kicking off with a huge geopolitical document. It feels, well, less like a strategy and more like a declaration of war on the post-war order.
It's the proposed 2025 Trump administration's National Security Strategy, or NSS.
Right. It's a 33-page blueprint, and it's full of self-congratulation. It really champions this unapologetically America first sort of mercantilist position.
And what's immediately striking is just how isolated its worldview is. The focus lands squarely on the Western Hemisphere.
And it basically just writes off entire continents. Africa, Australia, New Zealand, they're almost invisible in this document.
But the truly, let's say, striking part is where the document lands on Europe. There's a whole chapter, and the title is Promoting European Greatness.
Which sounds positive, but the content is anything but.
Exactly. It treats Europe less like an indispensable ally and more like a problem that needs to be fixed. The NSS issues this really stark warning of civilizational erasure.
Civilizational erasure. And who do they blame for that?
It directly blames EU policies on migration and, interestingly, on freedom of speech.
Hold on. So a U.S. national security document is linking its security not to military threats, but to European demographics.
Precisely. It goes to great lengths, it's very explicit, stating that if Europe continues on its present path, and I'm quoting here, within a few decades, certain NATO members will become majority non-European.
And that's framed as a security threat to the United States.
Yes, a direct threat.
That's just an extraordinary claim for a U.S. security strategy. And it doesn't just, complain about the supposed decline. It promises to actively intervene.
It does. The document explicitly says the U.S. will help Europe regain its former greatness by actively choosing and promoting what it calls patriotic European parties.
Which, for most European capitals, must sound like, what? Aggressive meddling in their internal politics. Or even outright regime change.
That's exactly how it's being read. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the whole definition of a security threat is pivoted. It demands Europe take primary responsibility for its own defense.
And reestablish strategic stability with Russia.
All right. Notice that pivot. The main threat, as framed by this document, is not Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
It's Europe's own cultural decay.
Yes. And that just radically alters the entire nature of the NATO alliance.
So Europe is basically left with three terrible options. They can ignore the NSS and just hope it goes away.
Unlikely.
They can try to flatter the president and beg for concessions. Or they face the grim reality that the U.S. isn't a reliable partner anymore and they have to fend for themselves.
And we're already seeing the pressure. Remember the Hague summit this year? NATO states agreed to raise military spending to an astonishing 5% of GDP.
5%. That shows you just how seriously they're taking this burden shift.
And the global implications are just massive. The NSS signals this definitive U.S. retreat into its own hemisphere. It's a fundamental attack on transnational institutions, on global trade rules.
A system America itself built.
The very system. And however imperfect that rules-based order is, by dismantling it, the NSS really risks ushering in what some are calling a Hobbesian free-for-all, where it's all just about national power and self-interest.
Okay, let's unpack this even further, because you're right. This document doesn't exist in a vacuum. This NSS aligns almost perfectly with two other recent blueprints.
That's right, the G20 restructuring proposal and the Heritage Foundation's 2026 blueprint.
And the ideology that ties all three together is complex, but the analysis we're looking at uses a very provocative term for it.
It does. Cruelty is policy.
Cruelty is policy. Can you break down what they mean by that, by institutionalizing exclusion?
Well, what's fascinating here is the argument that this new architecture, it operates on this very principle. It means the hardship that's inflicted on other countries or even on, domestic populations. It isn't some unfortunate accident.
It's part of the design.
It is the design. And this institutionalized exclusion, it shows up across three key revolutions in American statecraft.
Okay, let's start with the first one, the internal revolution.
Right. That's the shrinking of civic space. So traditional norms, deference to institutions, that's all replaced by an ethos where transgression, breaking the rules, signals authenticity.
And the NSS folds this right in.
It integrates internal cultural cohesion and ideological alignment as national security requirements. So the hardship that results from that, say from administrative purges, it's not seen as collateral damage anymore.
It's treated as, what's the term, permissive indifference.
Permissive indifference. It's just folded into the cost of doing business and governance.
So If I'm getting that permissive indifference idea right, it means the administration doesn't actually care that people get hurt by a policy purge. In fact, that pain is almost considered useful.
Exactly. It's a feature, not a bug. Now, the second revolution is external. This is all about foreign policy.
Alliances are no longer long-term commitments.
They're just transactional contracts now, conditional on immediate returns. We see this dramatic revival of the Monroe Doctrine.
Right, where the Western Hemisphere suddenly displaces Europe and the Indo-Pacific as the main area of interest.
And migration, which used to be a domestic or maybe a humanitarian issue, is now elevated to the central security threat.
And this leads to what you called selective dominance.
Yes, that's the foreign policy that comes out of it. It's assertion where U.S. leverage is high and the cost is low, but
A rapid retreat where obligations are costly or uncertain.
precisely. The U.S. will assert power in the Caribbean, for example, but it'll pull back commitments in, say, the South China Sea.
And the third revolution is economic. It's about formalizing a global hierarchy.
Correct. You get this tiered global economy. You've got your privileged rule makers on one side and the peripheral rule takers on the other.
And the NSS pushes this with, what, reshoring, high tariffs?
All of it. Industrial sovereignty centered on North America. And what's really fascinating is that the predictable economic pain from this, inflation, market disruption, supply chain chaos,
That's not seen as a failure.
no, it's treated as a mechanism for stabilizing this new hierarchical global order. That's what makes the cruelty completely systemic.
The common thread, then, running through all three of these revolutions is it's a restoration of a kind of colonial imperial mindset. It's based on hierarchy, on entitlement.
It allows the strong to impose costs while the weak are forced to absorb them.
And the final searing irony the sources point out is that the victims of this reordering are global, people living in places like Maputo and Dhaka, but they're also domestic. They're in places like Harlan, Kentucky, who are suddenly cut off from the world. So moving from Washington's global retreat, let's look at how India is adapting to this newly transactional world. We're looking at sources that contrast the strategic climate of 2005 with this proposed 2025 NSS.
The difference is night and day.
Back in 2005, there was this feeling of strategic confidence, right? The U.S. believed that strengthening India would strengthen the world.
Absolutely. The 2025 document is something else entirely. It's preoccupied with its own identity, it's aggressively defensive, and it treats global leadership as a cost to be minimized.
The shift from a partnership to a conditional arrangement is incredibly sharp.
It is. And when it comes to India, cooperation is acknowledged, but it's purely instrumental. India is seen, and I'm quoting again, less as a civilizational actor and more as a component in America's China calculus.
So India's rise is no longer an objective in itself.
It's just a function of whether or not it helps American strategy to contain China. That's it.
And you mentioned earlier the document reads like a performance for a domestic audience. It definitely has this celebratory tone.
Oh, completely. It catalogs these claimed diplomatic triumphs, like resolving conflicts from Cambodia and Thailand to Pakistan and India.
Which, to anyone outside the U.S., reads more like, political assertions for domestic consumption than actual verifiable foreign policy wins.
The message couldn't be clearer. The NSS demands more from its partners, while explicitly offering less in return.
So what does this all mean for New Delhi's long-term planning?
Well, it means India simply cannot rely on Washington to invest in its rise as a matter of strategic design anymore. The explicit signal in the document is that partners must assume primary responsibility for their regions.
Which makes any U.S. support conditional and extremely limited.
This isn't the U.S. retreating from the Indo-Pacific entirely, but it is certainly shifting the heaviest burden onto the regional players.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Paradoxically, this 2025 strategy, which is shaped by so much grievance and suspicion, it might actually widen the space for India's autonomy.
How so?
By contracting U.S. commitments and focusing so aggressively inward, it sort of forces India to pursue its own rise independently, to craft a global role that's suited exactly to its own scale and interests.
Without the assumption of a constantly supportive external power.
Exactly. It necessitates a true self-reliance. Now, that geopolitical chaos is the macro picture, but let's bring it right down to ground level. Let's look at a crisis that affects every single breath we take.
We're transitioning now to a critical public health and environmental deep dive.
We are. We're talking about the crisis of inhalable microplastics, or MPs. Specifically, those tiny particles smaller than 10 micrometers that are adding to the severe pollution burden in Indian cities.
And this is based on a first-of-its-kind comprehensive study from ICER Kolkata, which spanned 4 major cities. And the findings are, to be frank, alarming.
How alarming are we talking?
Researchers estimated the average concentration is about 8.8 micrograms per cubic meter. So if you're an average city resident, that means you are breathing in about 132 micrograms of microplastics every single day.
And the size is the critical issue, right? They're so small.
So might they just bypass your body's natural defenses and penetrate deep into the lungs?
And it's not just plastic dust. These MPs are acting as Trojan horses.
That's the perfect way to describe it. They smuggle in toxic co-pollutants. Things like heavy metals. Lead was found highest in Kolkata and Delhi, and hormone disruptors like diethyl phthalates.
And it gets worse.
It does. They found that MPs can carry microbes, including harmful fungi like Aspergillus fumigatus.
Which contains antibiotic resistance genes.
Right, so you're potentially spreading infections that are resistant to common treatments.
This continuous internal contamination is then directly linked to increased risks of what? Cancer, hormone-related diseases.
Breast problems, severe respiratory illnesses, you name it. And what really stands out from the data is the variation. Winter evenings showed a staggering 74% increase in concentration.
74%.
And location matters. Delhi and Kolkata showed concentrations over 14 micrograms per cubic meter, which is much higher than coastal cities like Mumbai and Chennai.
And where are these things coming from?
The sources are diverse. You have fragments from packaging, tire wear, cosmetics. Then you have filaments, which often come from synthetic textiles, like fleece jackets or toy fillings.
This raises a huge policy question because the current air quality index, the AQI, it doesn't capture this problem at all.
Not fully, no. We need targeted policy reform. We need to protect vulnerable groups like traffic police from carcinogenic tire wear particles.
And we need a real ban on certain single-use plastics while favoring materials like cotton-based clothing. Okay, now we shift our focus internally to central and eastern India, and we're revisiting the root causes of the Maoist movement in the Red Corridor.
The conventional wisdom always points to that two-pronged approach: security and socioeconomic development.
Right. But the missing element, according to this new analysis, is the systemic failure of governance. Specifically, the structures designed to protect marginalized populations.
This really raises an important question. Why did the fifth schedule fail so completely? It was meant to be a new social contract for Adavasis, giving them special provisions for self-governance.
So what went wrong?
The reality was that colonial administrative structures were just retained, so the local population was subjected to severe exploitation, even with constitutional safeguards supposedly in place.
And the evidence of this failure is just stark. In 2010, the region was ranked worse than sub-Saharan Africa on the Multidimensional Poverty Index.
Millions of tribal people were dispossessed of their land after liberalization policies kicked in.
And a critical administrative factor was the lack of local representation. The personnel were, quote, overwhelmingly outsiders.
Outsiders who carried inherent bias and just made the alienation worse, creating this total vacuum of authority.
Which created a fertile ground for the Maoists.
Exactly. They successfully mobilized this aggrieved population by running parallel governments, the Janat and Sarkar. They offered the critical services the state wasn't providing.
Schools, paramedics, speedy justice.
And they promised ownership over jal, jungle and zameen water, forests and land. They effectively filled the moral and functional void that the state had left behind.
The current dilemma is that crucial rights-based laws are still being diluted. Acts like the Forest Rights Act and PISA.
They face constant systematic violations. State governments, especially in mineral-rich states like Chhattisgarh, are under intense pressure to unlock mineral deposits.
And in doing so, they just undermine the powers of the local village councils, the Gram Sabhas, completely gutting those legal safeguards.
We really need to look seriously at stronger models, perhaps something like the Sixth Schedule's autonomous districts, for more robust governance.
For our final deep dive, we're focusing on a specific, powerful account of the excessive and often absurd administrative burden placed on essential government employees.
We're talking about a woman named Kusum, a mathematics teacher with chronic vertigo.
And she was drafted as a booth-level officer, or BLO, for something called the Special Intensive Revision.
Her routine just shows the intense human cost of this. She hasn't actually taught her students in school for a full month. Her hours are from 9:30 in the morning until 10 or 11 at night.
And she's processing, what, about 50 of the 700 forms she's been assigned?
Roughly. And what's truly galling is that this entire data-heavy job relies solely on her personal, 299 rupee internet plan.
Because the government office she works in has no Wi-Fi.
No Wi-Fi access whatsoever.
And the toll on her health, and more importantly on her job as a teacher, is severe.
Her vertigo flares up if she sits for too long. And despite 3 formal exemption requests from her principal.
Citing both her health and her essential role as exam in charge for the Class 10 board exams.
The Election Commission just never responded, so now she's forced to help her pre-board students over the phone, and she regrets every missed hour of classroom teaching.
The pressure sounds relentless.
Yeah.
There's a mandatory WhatsApp reporting cycle.
Yes, that stretches from 8 a.m. one day to 8 a.m. the next. This forces the BLOs to stay until 11 p.m. or even later, just to meet deadlines and prove they're complying. It's an unsustainable pace.
And this kind of high-pressure essential work also attracts interference.
The source detailed a specific anecdote about a local politician, Amandal Adhiach, who visited.
And he ignored all the core issues of workload and health strain, and instead just pushed politically motivated concerns about Bangladeshi infiltrators.
Then he abruptly left, after learning the writer's Muslim name, avoiding any real conversation about the actual strains of the job. It just shows you where the priorities often lie.
But what stands out here is the simple, practical feedback from the ground. There are easy solutions to this.
Absolutely. Deploying newly appointed staff who are on probation for tasks like electoral roll revision, instead of diverting essential people like teachers who are already carrying a full load.
It would relieve this immense, unnecessary burden without compromising the important work. It's common sense.
The central question, really, that runs through all these documents, from the U.S. national security strategy, demanding burden sharing from India, all the way down to the local policy overwhelming a teacher like Kusum, is this.
Who ultimately pays the price for governance and who gets to decide where that cost is absorbed? We'll leave you with that thought for your week.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.